Well, tariff dividend checks. Don't spend the money just yet. Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon and welcome to the Prudent Money Radio Show. I'm your host, Bob Brooks. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, let's start with the IRS and their budget problem. A series of 2026 government funding bills proposes to cut IRS revenue in two ways. IRS expert Dan Pilla is here to give us his take. Dan, great to talk to you. Boy, it seems like it's been a long time.
It has been a long time, Bob. It's been a couple of months since we talked last, but here I am back in the saddle again.
Yeah, back in the saddle. And, you and I, I don't know, a week ago or so, were talking a little bit over the phone and talking about the weather. We've had our share of here, and y'all, of course, always have your share there. I would think, of course, heavy snow and that kind of thing. We're not going to drive good in any of this type of weather. But I got to think that when it comes to ice, which is what we really predominantly had, that pretty much is the equalizer between the maybe two.
Yeah, it really is because we get our share of ice up here too. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, it's bad because at least what happens in Texas is, the temperature will rise above 32. Mm-hmm. But there have been plenty of times here in Minnesota where we've had heavy, wet snow. I mean, really wet snow. And then it gets cold and then it stays cold. And now the ice is everywhere. Now you're battling ice for weeks at a time to try to get it, off the sidewalks and roads and driveways and so on.
I mean, it's just continuous where you live. I mean, do you ever get to a point where you go, no, this isn't worth living in this area?
Yeah, about twice a week, Bob, I get to that point. What am I doing in this state? And my kids will call me up on the phone once in a while and say, Dad, what are we doing in this state? What's wrong with you? Why do you live here? and I used to say that to my dad all the time too. Why here? Why did Grandpa come here of all places? But here we are. We got roots. We got family. What do you do?
Yeah, you deal with it. So let's talk a little bit about the IRS, your favorite subject. And things have. I was just thinking about this as I was reading through your letter and your material. Is that it seems like things have been pretty quiet, unusually quiet with the IRS. Now it seems like things are starting to heat up a little bit. There are two budget situations that you write about in your letter. First, it will cut over half of the IRS's remaining $80 billion of supplemental funding created by the Biden administration's Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. I'm sure that they need this money. Talk a little bit about what's happening.
Well, they'll tell you they need the money, and as a matter of fact, Bob, compared to where they were, 3 years ago, you certainly could make a case that they need the money. Of course, I will never ever justify budget increases with the IRS or personnel increases with the IRS because my goal is to eliminate the IRS and the income tax. You and I have talked about that quite a bit. Right. But in answer to your question, to put this in perspective here, the Inflation Reduction Act, which was Biden administration. I think it was 2022 bill that passed, gave the IRS an $80 billion supplemental funding package over a 10-year period of time. All right, so they were going to hire $80 billion. They were going to spend $80 billion over 10 years in addition to their ordinary appropriation, which was about $12.5 billion a year. So it just about doubled their annual budget. And they were going to hire tens of thousands of new employees, again, spread over that 10-year period of time. And they were going to enhance this aspect and increase that aspect. Well, a significant amount, almost two-thirds, closer to 70% of that appropriation was targeted at enforcement. And that really raised the ire of an awful lot of people, and I complained about that long and loud. the various articles and so forth, radio shows, not unlike this one right here, where I complained about the fact that they were spending almost no money on taxpayer assistance and this massive amount of billions of dollars on enforcement and so on. And I argued, with proper justification that it was just the wrong way to spend the money. Well, very shortly after that, within 2 years, 2002, by 2024, by 2024, Congress started clawing back the money and saying, listen, you're not going to spend all this money on enforcement. We need to spend some money on taxpayer assistance. So they took my cue. And so where we're at right now is they clawed back about $60 billion of those dollars. Well, that's not accurate. They clawed back about $40 billion of those dollars because about $20 billion of it was already spent, and so now there was roughly another $20 billion on the docket, so to speak, on the table, and Congress is clawing back about $11 billion of that. So just like you said in your introduction, about half of it is being clawed back, and of course the IRS is complaining about that and whining about that because it's coming on top of the agency losing 85,000 employees over the span of 2025, and so that's creating a bit of a struggle for the agency, no doubt about that.
Well, that's gotta be a real problem, right?
Well, it is a real problem. There's no doubt about that. To the extent that we've got this massive Internal Revenue Code and we've got this massive compliance responsibility that businesses and individuals have to meet, and the IRS is collecting 165 million individual income tax returns this year, and another plus or minus 110 million business tax returns, and the IRS is going to send out 100 million notices over the next 12 months regarding this problem or that problem. People need help getting these things resolved, and I don't just mean help from the outside, guys like me that help folks get their problems solved, but they need help inside the IRS to get these problems solved as well. And so the question is, how do you do that in a way that makes sense? And my answer to that is you do it through taxpayer assistance, taxpayer education, taxpayer assistance, taxpayer outreach, teaching people what to do, having the staff in the Internal Revenue Service that are specifically focused on problems resolution, such as the Taxpayer Advocate's Office and the IRS Office of Appeals. These are the places that really need to be staffed and funded, and not the enforcement activities. And the IRS, I shouldn't say the IRS. Well, yeah, I mean the leadership in the IRS really over as long as I've been paying attention, Bob, which is north of 40 years, they've just been delusional when it comes to enforcement. And they seem to think that just because you dial down enforcement, everybody's going to turn into a tax cheat. Well, everybody doesn't turn into a tax cheat, because people don't wake up in the morning and say to themselves, how can I tick off the IRS today? I know I'll stop paying my taxes. I'll stop filing my tax returns. That's not what people do. 98% of every dollar collected by the IRS is paid in without the need of IRS intervention or enforcement. So 98% of all federal revenue, and this is consistent now over the last probably 30 years, and I'll bet it goes back even farther than that. That 98% number is consistent, and what that means is people will do what they're supposed to do if they know what to do and if compliance is simple. So Congress has got to focus not on enforcement, not on grinding people into powder, but teaching people what they're supposed to do in the first place and keeping the law simple. That's the key. They got to keep the law simple, but of course they don't do that. Every just seems like every month that goes by, there's new tax laws and regulations that we got to somehow figure out.
This kind of brings up two things for me. The first one is, it would seem to me that President Trump would want to keep the IRS very strong and very powerful, and I would assume that is through force, the way that they've always done things. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, it was also seemed to me that there is a minimum workforce that has to be compiled to take care to run the agency. And you just wonder if they're going to be able to get to that point with all these people leaving and retiring, and with what the budget allows them to do from a hiring standpoint. What do you think about that?
Well, let me respond to your first comment first. Trump never gave any indication at anywhere along the way that he was in favor of heavy-handed IRS enforcement. There have been presidents and presidential candidates in the past that have said things like, we need to beef up the IRS, we need to strengthen tax enforcement, we can't let all these tax cheaters get off the hook. Look at how big our deficit is, we got to go after that money. As if going after the money would solve the deficit. It never will, because they'll just spend more. As soon as they get $1, Bob, they spend $1.25. Sure. You know that. So there's no amount of money that's going to fix the deficit. But that's a different discussion entirely. So, but to your point, I don't see any comments or actions by the president that would indicate that he's in favor of heavy-handed enforcement. And as a matter of fact, the president has made comments, and they've not really developed into anything, but he has made comments that he's in favor of abolishing the IRS entirely and going to some alternative system. And again, that's never been fleshed out in definitive terms that we can evaluate and criticize one way or the other. But there that is. So there's that. And what was your second question? I'm sorry.
The second point was, it seems like there's you definitely have probably more people than you need. You're going to lose a lot of people through retirement and in other types of situations. Are they going to be able to get to at least to the minimum amount of workforce to run the agency versus a situation where they're very understaffed?
Well, and that's the $6 million question, Bob, is how many people do you need to run the agency? And the fact of the matter is that, and I've written about this in the past as well, the more responsibilities, non-tax related responsibilities that are heaped on the Internal Revenue Service, the less effective they are at doing their core job, which is to collect the nation's revenue. And so what I mean by that is the IRS is tasked with administering a number of federal welfare programs through the tax code that are called refundable tax credits. The biggest and most common example of this is the Earned Income Tax Credit. All right, the Earned Income Tax Credit allows people to get money back from the government, more money back from the government that they paid in the first place. Normally, when you get a tax refund, Bob, you get a tax refund because you paid in too much, right?
Right.
Well, with an Earned Income Tax Credit, it's refundable, meaning that if you paid in $2,000, let's say you pay in $2,000 to the IRS through your wage withholding, and you file a return that shows a $3,000 Earned Income Tax Credit. Well, that means you're going to get $1,000 more back from the government than you paid in the first place. All right, that's a welfare program that's administered by the IRS. And there's a handful of them in the tax code. There's not just one or two. There's a whole bunch of them in the tax code that the IRS has to administer. So they got to set up the infrastructure to handle this. They got to set up the screening processes. They got to use, all this computer technology to babysit this stuff. And then, of course, the Earned Income Tax Credit. And in fact, all of these refundable credits are the largest source of fraud in the Internal Revenue Code. So, these politicians run around saying rich people are cheating on their taxes. No, the biggest share of cheating is coming through these refundable credits because it's free money from the government. So that's what's spawning the fraud. And if the Congress would stop loading these burdens onto the Internal Revenue Service and spreading them out so thin, they wouldn't need this many people to do their job. All right, so that's a critical observation right there.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show, talking to Dan Pilla about what's happening with the IRS, getting his thoughts. If you want more information on Dan, taxhelponline.com is the website to go to. A lot of great information there. All the books that Dan's written are all there as well, and you can go check that out. That's at taxhelponline.com. Talk a little bit, just real quick. I'm just curious. What kind of education programs would you advocate for?
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, let's talk about these credits, for example. The taxpayer advocate, a couple of weeks ago, the taxpayer advocate made an announcement that the IRS is sponsoring EITC Awareness
I
Day.
remember this.
Earned Income Tax Credit Awareness Day. Like it's a federal holiday, right? Like it's Groundhog Day or Independence Day. Of course, Groundhog's not a federal holiday. But anyway, the point is that she's saying we got to make more people aware of the Earned Income Tax Credit because not everybody who qualifies for the credit is claiming it. Well, this is bizarre to me because
I just made my head hurt.
Well, yeah, because the watchdog agencies, the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, and the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration, TIGTA, have done report after report after report after report for the last probably 20 years, identifying the Earned Income Tax Credit, along with several other refundable credits, as the largest source of fraud in the Internal Revenue Service. About 27% of all of the EITC payments that are made to people, Bob, are erroneous or fraudulent payments. In other words, the taxpayer made a mistake on the return regarding EITC, or the taxpayer outright cheated on the return regarding EITC. And so why is the taxpayer advocate running around saying we need more people claiming the credit, when as a matter of fact there are too many people claiming the credit that don't qualify? All right, so here's a kind of education program that we would need with regarding EITC. What are the qualifications? All right, what are the income brackets that qualify? What are the rules? People need to understand these things, and they don't get that stuff from the IRS. Now, if somebody goes onto the website and very specifically looks for the stuff, okay, that's fine. You'll find it there, and you'll find the qualifications, and you'll be able to read through it and say, well, I qualify or don't qualify. But there's no affirmative outreach by the IRS to people to direct them to the website. It's just all reactionary. On the other hand, the taxpayer advocate does this EITC Awareness Day, which is an affirmative thing that they're blowing out on social media and news releases and all this stuff. I mean, why wouldn't you make people aware of the rules instead of just saying, hey, come get your free money from the government? That'd be the kind of thing that needs to happen here.
You know, that is two observations. First, it's Friday, January 23rd is Happy EITC Awareness Day. And I've talked to you twice now, 2 or 3 times, and you've mentioned this. And do you realize you can't say that without laughing? It's just funny to me because you literally just start laughing. You can't help yourself.
I can't help myself, Bob. It's the darndest thing I've ever seen.
So
it's anyway. Go ahead.
You got to have a sense of humor to do what you do. Talk a little bit about how Congress attaches riders that dictate how the IRS can spend their budget dollars. I found and I should get your opinion on this. I found the rider about digital assets very interesting. I mean, I think we are coming really close to that day where we start to see the digital dollar and the new way of doing things.
Well, yeah, and well, first of all, let me answer your question. A policy rider is something that the Congress will tag to a bill that specifically dictates how funds may or may not be used, which often limits agency actions. All right, so particular enforcement actions or such as that. All right, so in this bill that's proposed now, it has not been passed yet. Of course, we know the government's shut down here now again for what, a week or so, or who knows how long. Right. But anyway, these riders get stuck onto these funding bills that do more than just say, X dollars for this, X dollars for that. It gives specific guidance to the agency that's getting money that says you can't do this and you must do that. Now, with respect to digital assets, there's a rider in the bill that would give the Treasury 90 days to produce a report that shows the legal authority of the United States government to establish a strategic digital asset stockpile stockpile. Now, here's the difference, Bob, between what's in this rider and what the Biden administration proposed in 2021 or 2022. The Biden administration wanted to establish an official U.S. digital currency that their vision was to drive all other digital currencies out of the market. You know this better than I do. You remember because the history of banknotes, right? The history of banknotes in the United States in the 1800s was that banks all over the country would issue their banknotes, right?
Right.
And those banknotes were tradable currency. And so the United States currency essentially replaced the banknotes. And Biden administration was trying to do, their vision was to do the same thing with digital currency, drive all other digital currencies out of the market and have only one U.S. digital currency. That's not what the Trump administration is proposing here. The Trump administration this rider specifically says that there can't be any work done in establishing an official U.S. digital currency. The focus is, should the United States Treasury invest in digital currencies that are already in the marketplace to build a strategic stockpile, no different than oil or gold, right? That's so that's what's going on here with that.
We've got about 3 minutes left. Would love to hear your take on this tariff dividend type setup they're trying to work towards.
Well, first of all, it's nonsense, Bob. A dividend is something that you pay out of profits, right? Corporations pay dividends to their shareholders based on the profit. So if the company makes $20 million in a year, and they distribute that $20 million to their shareholders on a pro-rata basis, they got to have profit to distribute a dividend. There is no profit in the United States government, and this is one thing that really troubles me about the Trump administration. Trump is out there talking about the trillions and trillions of dollars that's being collected through these tariffs, and we're getting all this money, and it's just flowing in, and it's unbelievable. Well, there's been about maybe 250, $300 billion that's been collected from tariffs over 2025. Okay, that's fine. That's $250 billion. Let's just call it $300 billion. First of all, the money's paid by U.S. taxpayers. All right, it's not paid by foreign companies or foreign countries. It's paid by the U.S. taxpayers that buy the products that bear the tariff cost, right? That's who does it. That's number one. So let's say we got $300 billion. Okay, that's great. In 2025, the U.S. Treasury collected about $5.3 trillion. I said 300 trillion. It's 300 billion they got, right? So in 2025, the United States Treasury collected about $3.5 trillion in revenue and spent about $6.75 trillion in revenue. So you tell me, Bob, you're a financial expert. Where's the profit?
Yeah, it's pretty obvious.
They're spending more than they take in. And there's just simply not enough tariff revenue to make a difference.
Once again, if you want more information on Dan, taxhelponline.com is where you go for that information. Dan, let's not let 2 months go by this next time. And appreciate you coming on the program. Talk to you next month.
All right, Bob. My pleasure. See you soon.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. I was just thinking, I love talking to Dan, and to get to do this once a month. And what a blessing he is to come and talk about what he knows and share that with us. So if you have a question for Dan and want to know about it, any information, taxhelponline.com is where you go to get information on Dan. And I think he's got 15 or 16 books for where he's at right now, but lots of information on how to deal with the IRS and any issues you might be dealing with. There's something there that can help you for sure. Well, this is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. If you got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com. Until we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.